Okay, I'm Cheryl Jernigan. Oh, it's being recorded. I'm a longstanding patient research advocate. If you were in the other session, you know I haven't got a good, easy way to define that yet. Um, I not, I'm working with researchers to ensure their research is laser focused on what matters to patients. And not just from the researcher's perspective. We all think we know what patients want and need, but we don't really know until we talk and ask them what they want and need. So I'm a 26-year survivor of triple negative breast cancer. I'm also a co-survivor with my husband. Jeff was diagnosed and lived for 12 years with metastatic prostate cancer until it killed him in 2018. And then he also, along that journey, got diagnosed with HPV tonsil cancer. We did, and I continue to bring our lived experience in living with cancer 24 hours a day, 7 days a week into the research decision making. That experience brings insights and wisdom you can't get any other way. Interestingly, about 90% of the doctors recommend treatments and procedures to their patients that they've not gone through themselves, yet they think they know the impact of those treatments and those procedures on their patients. When you think about cancer treatments are designed to impact the cancer, but they also impact the patients as well. And doctors know how it's impacting the cancer, but most of them don't fully understand how it's impacting their patients' lives and the quality of their lives. And that's a huge disconnect, especially when it comes to research. Today, I will be sharing with you who are research advocates. And we have two types. We have community research advocates and patient research advocates. Why partnering with advocates is important and what benefits you can gain and be gained by your research with having an advocate partner. And I'll give you an example and some resources you might want to use at the end. So why engage research advocates? Well, there's a history, in case you haven't noticed, there's a history of mistrust between patient communities and researchers, especially marginalized or under-resourced communities. These historical abuses are well documented by the Tuskegee, I never can say that word right, Tuskegee, that one, the syphilis experiment, and the Henrietta Lacks story. Mistrust and still unconscious biases carry on stereotypes and assumptions and misinformation. They directly and indirectly are impacting our community's health disparities. For instance, we do happen mistrust and biases. Whoops, I went the wrong way. Mistrust is a major barrier to advancing medical research. We call it, for instance, precision medicine. But how can it be precise when the participants, the data, the biorepositories, all of that is based largely on white people of European descent? How can it be precise? If patients and communities don't have an understanding of how, and you've heard this before, of how, I keep wanting to go the wrong way, how or why the research is supposed to be impacting them and their communities, they're at best reluctant to say yes, and more likely, you saw the hand and Sara saying, say no to that research. No understanding, there's no trust, there's no data, there's no biospecimens, there's no participants for the research. If study participants and data and the biorepositories lack diversity, your study lacks generalization. It begs the question of how relevant is it really in the real world? Our goal at Frontiers is to infuse lived expertise into the work, lived expertise that can be gained by working with patient and community researchers or research advocates. So who are community research advocates? Well, they are frontline community experts. They have lived experience in and with the community that they represent. They have and often still do live and or work in their communities, and they have a vested interest in the development and well-being of their communities and are committed to improving their community's health and well-being. They actively seek to make a difference to the people in their communities. They are sage advisors about and connectors with the people in their community. They seek engagement and research through mutually beneficial and inclusive partnerships, partnerships that respect and support the values, beliefs, and needs of their communities. So who are patient research advocates? I want to ask you, how many of you have involved a patient research advocate in your research? Can you raise your hand? Okay, so just to make sure we're all on the same page, a patient research advocate brings a lived experience in a particular disease or medical condition. We have the knowledge and wisdom gained and the insights gained only by living 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with that disease or medical condition. We share that insights and wisdom, and we are the survivors, the co-survivors, which are the family and friend caregivers, and the previvors, those who are diagnosed at high risk. We are interested in research. We are also committed to self-development and education. We want to understand the basic process of research and also a little bit about the science behind our disease and medical condition and its treatments. Some research advocates do have some scientific training, but most of us, the vast majority of us, don't. Our job is to bring that lived expertise, a non-scientific patient community expertise in the decision-making process. So how could working with, oh, I forgot to mention this, we're also tied to the broader community of survivors and co-survivors if we're patient research advocates. That means that we share and learn from other survivors and co-survivors so that when we're working with researchers, we can share a broader, more collective perspective in what we're doing. So why partner? Well, we ensure your research is focused on the patients and the communities, and that is the focus, and it stays the focus. We make sure your goals and your aims are relevant to patients. We can help hone your research question and goals to be patient-centric. We add, or community-centric. We add a human face, a real person, a sense of urgency to the whole discussion and decision-making. We are basically your touchstone for why your research matters or could matter. You gain real-life, diverse, insightful expertise, which impacts your research and the decisions being made, and we spur innovation. We're not scientists, so we're not bound by what we think we know scientifically. So we can ask the what if questions or what about questions, or sometimes what people think are clueless questions, but these often spur new insights, new ideas, and new innovations as we begin to discuss the answers to those questions. I've seen it happen time and time again. So here's a successful advocate researcher partnership. And I mean, this person is a patient partner. Tanya, ensures the research is patient-centered. She also hones the research's impact to make sure that it really is impacting patients. She discusses the proposed clinical trial. She assures that they are patient-centered in their approach and also ease of participation. She hones the research proposals in a patient-centric way, reviewing and editing lay abstracts, cutting out that jargon, concepts, and goals. And she is a research team member of the research team. And this includes on funded research, for instance, with the National Cancer Institute. The researcher helps Tanya understand research in general and better understand his own research. This helps Tanya be a more effective advocate and also a more effective partner and advisor with him. She can educate the community and other patients about research in general and also about Dr. Gahn's research. She can help reverse some of the negative stigma that people have about medicine and or research. So successful advocate researcher partnerships don't just happen overnight, and they do take work. And I think this was highlighted in some of the presentations that some of you have been in throughout the day so far. First of all, treating each other with mutual respect and participation, or mutual respect and professionalism. This includes actions like first seeking to understand each other and the perspectives and expectations we all bring to the table, allowing sufficient time and to mutually understand, agree upon, and integrate all of our perspectives into the research project, from the grant submission through implementation and through dissemination, and assuring timely, consistent follow-through and communications. Second, it's creating mutual benefit by working together and learning from each other and co-mentoring each other. When you learn together and from each other, advocates learn more about research. They learn more about the research project. They can better understand the process and how to effectively impact both research and its outcomes. The PI and research team learn about what really matters to patients and communities, what can be effective for them, and the urgency, the simple urgency of really finding answers. It's not, we don't want these tomorrow, we want them today, and ways to enhance their project and communicate their research in ways that connect with the community they're trying to serve and meet those needs. And finally, we're working to achieve common goals. These can be summarized by saying, we are working together to conduct research which makes a substantial difference in the way people feel, function, and survive. This and other kinds of guidance can be found in the Patient Investigator Voices Organizing Together. That's an initiative of the KU Cancer Center's Researcher and Advocate Toolkit that we have. And I've got a link to that toolkit at the end of this slide. So the bottom line is, imagine the difference we can and do make when we work together. And I thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today and to hopefully have more discussions with you. These are links, and all of these resources were developed by the Pivot program, which is Patient Investigator Voices Organizing Together. If you're a KU Cancer Center researcher, you can ask for a session with our Rapid Reactor team. And that will give you patient feedback in a short, easy way to do that on a research question or other things. And again, I thank you for the opportunity to be here and look forward to future discussions. Mm-hmm.
There we go. Perfect. Okay, now after Sarah's presentation, for those of you guys that were in the room for the 140, I feel like I should have just scrapped all my slides that I spent way too much time looking at, reviewing. Maria and I were talking last night. She goes, I saw you sent your slides at like 1:20 in the morning. She goes, I was still working on mine. But I know you guys are in the room. Many of you guys are researchers. You understand, right? Like sometimes late nights, that's what we have to put in. So my name is Kelly Ranallo. I represent the rare disease community. And the reason why I do, just like Cheryl, I have that lived experience, both of which I don't share very often. I actually have a rare disease, but I speak in a more of an advocate for the patient community from a parent perspective. So my husband and I, we actually have 4 children, but both of our little girls were affected by rare diseases. Katie was our second daughter. We actually lost her at 5 months old because we were chasing the wrong rare disease and there wasn't the research to give us hope at the time. And then 5.5 years later, our oldest daughter, who by that time I was the hypervigilant mom, for any of you mom or parents in the audience, because I now lost a child. And so we went from provider to provider trying to find a diagnosis for that mom gut that I think when you really engage with your patients and your patients' communities from a research perspective, and I know many of you probably can feel this personally, because it's not just the researcher hat you wear, right? Many of you are either loved ones of family members who have had some kind of complex medical condition, or maybe even going through it now. Maybe some of you also have children that you spent years trying to find a diagnosis, but not knowing. And then when you did get a diagnosis, to find out there was no treatment for it. And so I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you guys all today. and really to talk about the importance of not only what you guys do, but how we as the patient community can support and that really move it together, move that needle together, just like Cheryl was talking about the other day. We can't do it without you, and we truly believe you can't do it without us either. So I only have 10 minutes, and I'm pretty sure I just used about 3 of those minutes. So I'm going to try to keep track to time. So a lot of this is going to be over. I think the challenge that we see, and let me see if I can maybe. There we go. It really is. And again, I'm going to go back to Sara as I'm looking at this patient-driven collaboration of stakeholders. Clearly, the audience that I was looking for today was our medical community, because otherwise I would just say, those of us that need to get together to get it done, because that's really what we're talking about. Is we can't do it without each other. We can't do it without funders. We can't do it without our legislators. There's a lot of things that going into making hope and allowing us all to be successful. So for those of you guys that may not know the statistics of rare disease, what makes something rare? Here's just a little bit of the demographics. I'm not going to go into all of them because you guys can see this, but it really in the United States, and again, this is even a problem because here in the United States, we define it as something differently than if we were sitting in Paris or Madrid or somewhere else. They classify it differently. So here in the United States, less than 200,000 people have to have the condition living in the United States for it to be considered a rare disease, disorder, genetic condition, however you want to term it. And I think the important thing is that about 50% of patients with rare diseases are actually children, and 30% of those children will not live to see their 5th birthday. And unfortunately, that was our family's journey with this as well. Why? Why is rare disease? Because people say, why do I study rare disease? It's hard. The patient numbers sometimes are small. We have to figure out how to get funding for it. And so why rare disease, and what are the challenges, and why should I care about rare disease? You're right. I mean, my daughter has Turner syndrome. Our living daughter, or the one that we lost, had histiocytoid cardiomyopathy. The fact that I can even say that, it shows you what you begin to learn as a parent or a patient advocate. I actually think I should have like at least a pseudo PhD in genetics at this point in time. But because when you put us all together, when you really think and you put all, even though a lot of the data you're going to see is 7,000 rare diseases, with genomic testing and genomic medicine, we now know there's over 10,000 rare diseases that have been identified. But if you put us all together, so disease specific, we're not maybe that big, especially ultra rare diseases. Katie, our daughter's, was 1 in a million. But when you put us all together, we make up about 30 million Americans. 1 in 10 Americans will have a rare condition at some point in time. And when you put us all together, that's more than AIDS and cancer combined. So the population, then when we come together, is pretty large. Oh, last comment there. The biggest problem, there's only 5%. Only 5% of rare diseases have treatments. So if you think about the number of patients that really impacts and how many are still waiting for the research that many of you guys will be driving, it's significant, the change that you really can make. So what are the challenges in rare disease? I'm just going to go through this quickly so that I keep to my 10 minutes. It's that delayed diagnosis. How many of us, maybe even sitting in the room today, maybe there are some of us, it took me 40 years to finally get my diagnosis of narcolepsy for a lot of different reasons, because I was mom of 3 kids and I was tired, and well, shouldn't everybody be tired when they have 3 kids and are working and all those things? But so it took me literally 40 years, and I finally found my diagnosis sitting next to one of my friends that I didn't know, but it was my son's mom on a soccer team. And she also happened to be a sleep study pediatrician over at Children's Mercy. And I was explaining, she goes, oh, you have narcolepsy. I go, that's 40 years. You know how many doctors I've seen because of this? She goes, I can guarantee you have narcolepsy. So you never know where you're going to find your answers, maybe on the bleachers of a soccer practice or something. But the siloed healthcare delivery system, we were talking earlier, you know, complex diseases, you see a lot of different providers. And I hate to say it, but you guys don't talk very well to each other. Like, there are departments down the hallway, and if I ask, hey, who's doing research over here? They don't even know that they're doing research over there. So that's a challenge too. The limited coordination and patient advocacy efforts, funding, we talked a little bit more about that. Poorly coordinated patient research engagement. There's no front door for a rare disease. You can't go in a front door and say, hey, I have a rare disease. Where do I find the researchers that are interested in doing research in my disease? And so we have done a poor job in the rare disease space, not just here in Kansas City, but across the country. Limited research disease research funding engagement. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. Really a high risk on your return of investment, especially if you're talking about drug development. 9 out of 10 trials fail with the big price tag that go with it. And so when you're talking about small patient populations, that's a big risk to take sometimes. And then as I think all of us are aware, the health inequities and systemic biases of who's really participating or who even has access to research and to participate with research. There are some things legislatively that obviously have driven forward the investment in rare disease. Anybody that is thinking about it in this room or a future of rare disease research, we actually had some legislation with the Orphan Drug Act, which actually celebrated 40 years. This was a policy, again, driven by the patient community to say, we need incentives to the biotech companies, to the research community, for them to have an interest in these ultra rare diseases. So the government, this was passed really led by a mom who is an advocate, who really started this national movement. And now there's actual funding. So you'll see a graph up there. It shows you back in 1983, there were 2 drugs that got orphan drug designation in rare disease. And you see back in 2017, there were 80 approved in 1 year. So the impact that that can make. Again, huge interest and a lot of approval, because as we go back to that first slide, only 5%, 95% of patients living with rare diseases do not have an FDA approved treatment or drug. And so huge interest and huge incentives to be able to do some research in that area. I think the question that we'll be talking more about today is why partner with patients and families? I think Cheryl did a great job of showing, our lived experiences, what we can bring, but I don't mislead. And any of you guys that are familiar with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, the amount of money, not that they started with, but that they have now, they invest hundreds of millions of dollars a year into researchers like yourselves, or bench level research, all the way to translational science research, to really advance the cure for their community. And that's like a 1 in 40,000 people disease. We're not talking about something like diabetes that affects millions of Americans. The Zuckerberg Foundation, they just started an initiative called Rare as One. So there's more and more energy being built into it, but it's being driven by the patient community. And in the left here, you'll see, I guess you're right, is Charlie. So Charlie is actually lives here in Kansas City, has an amazing mom. That mom in herself, with the help of one other mom advocate, in the last 4 years have raised $3 million doing bake sales and haircuts and pretty much everything you can. It didn't have to come from it's nice when you have a family member that has a lot of money to make a big donation, but that's where the partnership really can come with the patient community. If we believe that you will be good stewards of our funds, we want hope, and we're willing to invest in that and stand side by side and help you raise those funds to do that. And then again, where does Frontiers play a part in this? We started working with Frontiers, a rare disease community, probably about 5 years ago here in Kansas City. They've been very incredibly good partners of us to really elevate rare disease as a whole. We now have an organization, a non-for-profit organization. We have an amazing CEO that just joined us part-time to really elevate this. But Frontiers has given us the opportunity to think about research, not just drug development. So how do we do transition of care from pediatrics to adults? They've partnered with us to make connections. We now have models of care, of how you can transition that care, and researchers that have been part of that to show that that model works and that we have good outcomes. We have a Collaborate to Cure series with BioNexus KC to really bring together our stakeholders on a regular basis, and Frontiers has been a big part of that, so that we can make those connections a little bit easier, both for the research community as well as for the patient community. Children's Mercy Genomic Answers for Kids, the Rare Disease Innovation Accelerator is an amazing group of people that come together that says, how can we repurpose drugs? How can we bring innovation quicker, sooner, faster? How can we collaborate to make that happen? the Trailblazers Awards and the different funding that they offer. The Stowers Institute has partnered. They have a great clinical translational science series. And then RareX, our organization, Rare KC, collaborates with national organizations as well on various projects. So here's my final picture. I think if there's anything that we know here in Kansas City is that if you put us all together in one space, we can make amazing things happen. And I truly believe that. We just have to continue to move forward at figuring out how do we get us all in the same space and how do we get ourselves connecting with each other to make the differences that we know we can make. So thank you. I'm sure I went over my 10 minutes. You can take it out of my moderator session later. I'm going to turn it over to Mariana.
Yeah. Let me make sure you're good. Okay. And number down.
I did not want to go after Kelly and Cheryl because now the bar is too high. But at the same time, it's a blessing to share this panel with them. So thank you. So my name is Mariana Ramirez. I am with the Junto Center for Advancing Latino Health. Many of my team are here. So you guys are awesome and I love you. And I'm also part of the community engagement core at Frontiers. And I have a few slides. I have a few slides, but I tend to talk too much. So feel free to wave at me if I'm beyond my 10 minutes. So the slides I'm going to share with you are about why one size does not fit all. And we know that if it did, we would not have a Cinderella. So please raise your hand if over the past month you had oatmeal, grits, or other cooked cereal. Thank you. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Oatmeal, grits, and other cooked cereals are a category within what we eat in America, which is part of the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey at the USDA. Now, if you ask this question to somebody like my team or to a group of Latino immigrants, we may miss the mark because maybe oatmeal, grits, and other cooked cereal don't resonate with us, but that doesn't mean we don't eat cooked cereals. We in fact do. We love atole, and we might eat it once a month or once a week or every day, depending on the season. In Mexico, Mexicans, we tend to have a lot of atole during Christmas time, winter, for example, but there are other cultures that have it year round. So if we don't have the right question, we may be missing the right answer. Now, next question. If you ask me how often I eat Mexican food, I would likely tell you every day, right? And Dr. Castro's laughing because I am originally from Mexico. I cook at home, and guess what I cook? Mexican food, right? Does that mean that I eat tacos, tamales, and tostadas every day? No, that would be a lot of vitamin T. And you have heard of vitamin T, that, right? Tacos, tostadas, tamales. I don't eat that every day at home. So when I, as a participant, read that question, it's very stereotypical. And now I'm wondering if you also have stereotypes about me and my culture. And all of a sudden, there is this potential barrier that wasn't there, but now it is. So these two questions, yeah, that's what goes in my mind. Yeah, that's not the case. These two questions are actually part of the Diet History Questionnaire 2 that was developed by the NCI. It was developed for the general public. It's largely used for epidemiologic studies. There are 3 versions. The DHQ1, the first version, was validated with 2 studies. None of those studies included people who did not speak English. One specifically excluded people who self-reported poor English reading skills. The Latino participation in both studies was 4% and 5% respectively. The tool has not been validated with other populations or in other languages. However, it was translated to Spanish. So as a researcher, when you find a tool like this from a reputable source, and it's already in Spanish, it can seem like gold, and it may be very tempting to use it, which might be the right way. But you have to make sure that you have the lived experience from somebody in the community who lives as a Latino, like every day, as a Spanish speaking Latino every day, so they can catch those nuances that I was just talking about, right? So they can tell you about the atole, so they can tell you about the Mexican food. The DHQ3 now, the newer version, is web-based. They fixed the Mexican food thing, they took it away. They added tortillas, which they didn't have before, so that's a huge improvement. But why am I telling you that? Because just as you need to pay attention to your instruments and make sure you tailor them when they're not available, when they're not already validated for you, that may need to apply to the whole intervention. You may need to tailor your whole intervention. We talked about the individual level, right? Like how I don't need tostadas and tacos every day. But there are other things around my environment that may also condition the way I relate to researchers and research in general. So picture, for example, Spanish-speaking Latino. 71% of Hispanics in the US speak a language other than English at home. So what language do you think they would prefer to communicate in research? Spanish, right? Like it makes sense. Just I like to see my doctor in Spanish. I also would like to talk to my research coordinator in Spanish. So you need to be ready to have that workforce, right? So thinking of the team that you're building, the team that you're developing, do you have the people that reflect that population? Then when we look at the meso level, maybe this person who you identify that is Spanish speaking, Latinos tend to be overrepresented in occupations that have no benefits or lower benefits. So maybe they don't have PTO. So how ready is your team to have research appointments available over weekends, during evenings, when people can come without taking PTO because they don't have one? And then at the macro level, let's talk about immigration, for example. What if your individual is a legal permanent resident, but they haven't had that status for 5 years? They're not eligible for medical coverage, for public medical coverage. So if your investigation requires a diagnosis, that may be a barrier for them, right? If they don't have health insurance, how are they going to get that diagnosis? So you have to be ready to make decisions about that. Are you going to be able to provide a clinical diagnosis so they can get in your study? Or are you going to advocate for systemic changes so that they can, in fact, get a diagnosis? So that's what's happening at the environmental level. But then our communities also tend to be at the intersection of all of these identities that oftentimes put them at higher vulnerability and higher disadvantage, right? So we're talking race, sex, education, socioeconomic status. So if you're Latina and you're a darker complexion and you're poor and you speak Spanish, then you're more likely to have experienced discrimination, oppression, racism. And that changes the lenses with which you communicate with research, with healthcare. And you as a researcher need to be ready to address that. So it doesn't make sense to create interventions for perfect patients that look the same, that can come to our research appointments Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 or 4:30 because the labs closes at 5. When in reality, our community looks more like this, right? So perfect participant reality. So I don't know how much I'm doing in time, but I would like to share a quick story about a tailored program and what that may look like. I think about 2018, Juntos got this full CDC recognition to deliver the diabetes prevention curriculum. It's a national program. It was very challenging to get that recognition. There are 3 levels of recognition, and we got the full recognition. So it was the highest level, and we were the only program in the state that was able to deliver in Spanish. We were so proud of that achievement. And when we were looking back at what we did to get there and what best practices we can share with others to get more people certified in the state, we knew we had a great team, amazing coaches. We knew the curriculum worked. But we also knew that flexibility was the norm for our team. It was not the exception. I was recently reading an article about depression and how 70% of poor women in that study were also women of color, and how it takes 10 times more attempts to have them come to a session compared to the rest of the population. And how a 16-week intervention really took 20 weeks. And when I read it, it resonated so much with me, because with diabetes prevention, the first 6 months of the program, it's 16 classes, and we had 16 classes plus the makeup classes every week, plus the makeup for the makeup class. And we had childcare, and we were delivering the program at churches, at community centers, at public libraries. We had it early in the day, in the evening, over the weekend. So we were being as flexible as possible, addressing all those environmental things that I was describing before, to make sure that that was not a barrier for our participant. And how could not do that? We had a mom, she would used to come with her stroller and her 2 little toddlers, and she'd be one of the ones who would come often to our makeup sessions. So how can you not have that available for them? She depended on her husband to give her a ride to come to the DPP. So it just makes sense to make those accommodations and help people achieve their goals to live healthier lives. Unfortunately, and we also made changes to the delivery of the curriculum itself. DPP was already adapted for Spanish-speaking populations, but then we made some more tailoring to make sure it resonated locally. So for example, we went together as a group to some grocery stores. We did some physical activity together. We did some cooking demonstration using traditional recipes in a healthier way. So we tailored the intervention itself, but also make sure that we were addressing all the environmental barriers that we could. Unfortunately, the initial funding for the DPP ended, and then the funding model that CMS proposed to continue the program didn't really work for us, so we had to switch gears. But scarcity is the mother of creativity. That's what my grandma always tells me. So that sparked ideas for an intervention. So we partnered with Dr. Dries at UMKC and with Vibrant Health, our Fairly Qualified Health Center in one of our Fairly Qualified Health Centers, and went back to our DPP participants, to a group of former DPP participants, and also partnered with some community leaders who had a lot of experience working with Latino communities. And together we tailored the in-person program and an already existing text program in Spanish, and we tailored it to develop our text-based DPP. So we pilot tested, and we got really, really promising results. About 50% of the participants lost 3% of their weight, about a third of them lost 5% of their weight. And this may seem modest, a modest loss of weight, but if you lose 5% of your weight when you're in pre-diabetes, your risk of developing diabetes decreases by 50%. So it's a huge deal. And about 21% of our participants reverted their pre-diabetes to a regular glucose level. So we were very, very pleased with that. So all of that that I described can be summarized on having the community in the mind from beginning to the end. And Cheryl and Kelly said that, right? From the moment you're conceptualizing the idea to thinking how you're going to implement it, to how you're going to disseminate it back to the community, in every step of the process, you need to keep in mind how you need to be equipped to achieve that. So engaging community members early on, that's a first step. But then if the intervention already exists, there are models that you can use to adapt it, evidence models that you can use to adapt it, and paying things like compensation, right? We talked about how hard it can be for participants meeting you. It's not that 1 hour they're spending with you. They might be taking half a day of PTO to make it there. There is transportation, daycare associated with that, so you need to compensate accordingly. And then your community partners, they also need to be compensated. I see Brian here in the audience. He's at the CHC of Wyandotte County. They are amazing partners in the community. They provide amazing services. They need to be brought early on and discuss their role and make sure they're compensated accordingly as well. So if you're interested in working with Latino communities, please reach out to us. This is a picture of most of everybody in our team. The other picture is Jaime, Glenda, and Romina. Jaime is with the Alzheimer's Disease Research Institute. We have a joint initiative called Juntos for Brain Health, and we have 4 projects in collaboration. So he has 2 NIH-funded projects, his KO1, his R21, and then we're working with Dr. Vidoni under that umbrella for an outreach project. And then we have a service project funded by the Mid-American Regional Council, everything around Alzheimer's, and a lot of that focused on Latinos. And then we're working with Dr. Barral, she's at Children's Mercy. We have supported her pilot work, recently her KL2, and now her K23. We're so proud of her. And in that picture, we're in Garden City with Glenda. Glenda works at the Garden City Community College, and we were in Garden City visiting partners, building those and nurturing those relationships. So I know my time is over, but if you have an idea for a study, please reach out. You can pitch it to our community advisory board. They're amazing and we'll be happy to give you feedback. If you don't know if you're ready for a study, come hang out with us. Spend a day with Griselda. She's at grocery store, at Latino businesses, talking to people about our program, learning from them, helping them meet their needs. We partner with wonderful organizations like CHC, Vibrant Health, Heart to Heart, United Way, to hold these community-based clinic events. You can see that in the picture. Great turnout and great opportunity to interact with the community and meet them where they are. If you speak Spanish, come practice your Spanish with us. Gracias.
Want to introduce them or who's doing introduction?
Thank you. Testing. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists for sharing your stories, such awesome concrete examples of things that have worked and opportunities that we can all optimize going forward. So to kick some things off, one of the things we were having fun talking about before coming on stage was this concept of appreciation and partnership. Can you talk a bit about things that have made you personally feel appreciated, a story, an example, and ways that you've seen have not worked, and ideas for how to make it better? Going down the list.
Okay, I'll start. Since Cheryl was so nice to raise her hands for all the standing ovations earlier today. So I think that's a really good, I think we all realize in this room that if we can partner, right, we can move that needle faster, further together than trying to do it individually. I think here in Kansas City, I think some of the partnership that I would say has gone really well is truly, I think Frontiers has been a great way. I mean, for rare disease, part of it was just bringing the awareness around rare disease and start just even getting the whole community to think about rare disease. Even, for example, my daughter has Turner syndrome. If I asked her, do you have a rare disease? She would say yes, because of what her mom does. But typically, no, she would say, I have Turner syndrome. And so those pieces of it. But Frontiers has really given us a platform to be able to do that. They've provided us as young advocacy organizations to have some funding, but it's not just the funding. I mean, they really have invited us to the table. There's still a long ways to go. I mean, I think when you think about what hasn't worked well or what is not still working well is back to the point, there's no front door. Like when I had got my diagnosis of narcolepsy, there was no place I could go and say, who's doing research in narcolepsy and where can I sign up? Because I'm a person that'd be like, I'm signing up. There's nowhere to find that. And so it's very challenging still. And I think we were having a conversation out in the front hallway. It's not just us as the patients, but I think researchers, I hear the same thing. Like, we want to connect with community, but how do we get there? Who's the right person to talk to? How can we make that genuine relationships? Because if you connect with us poorly the first time, like any relationship, it may take some time. So still opportunity there.
Great points.
One of the things I would say about appreciation is, and you mentioned this so well or alluded to it many times in your conversations, that the passion. So it's not just walking the talk, it's feeling the talk to show the passion that you really do care by your actions, word, and deed. And you have to feel it in your heart. And if you don't, it shows, it comes out that you're not really, you're just doing this. And so really tap into your why. Why are you doing this? What are you doing it for? Is it to make more publications? I mean, that's what I heard from one researcher. We need to write more papers. And I said, with all due respect, Betsy, we don't care a frick about your papers. But anyhow, so tap into the why. And the why, if you tap into what really matters, I hope, and what you really care about, it will be the same thing that patients do to help people feel, function, and survive better. And I hope that's why we're all here. And show that passion in your work and what you do in your relationships. And sometimes you think about the relationships and everything you said. Someone asked, can you apply this beyond just talking to the community? Yeah, you can practice this in every relationship you have. Every relationship you have, think about what it is you're doing to show mutual respect to that person, to follow up on communications, to do what you say you're going to do, and make sure that you're all on the same wavelength. I mean, seriously, and then to say thank you at the end of the day. One of the biggest challenges as a patient research advocate is we have sometimes gotten in the door to work with a researcher on submitting their application and their grant, and we've written a letter of support. We've actually worked them on the grant, but we never find out what happens unless it gets funded. Usually we find out if it gets funded, sometimes not always that, but most of the time we don't know if it ever got funded or not. You need to follow up with the people that you're working with. Don't string them along. Don't say that you care and then don't follow up when your research doesn't get funded. We learn from the reviews. We learn from you when it doesn't work out the way we expected. And we want you to succeed. And we want to work with you to make the next grant succeed. But we can't do that unless you keep us in the loop.
That's such a great example about teamwork even.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
you can
forgot
keep
your
that,
name.
no worries.
Got my own phone.
You celebrate the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. You work together to solve it.
If
Yeah.
I may add, completely agree about closing that communication gap that also has happened to us. I think for me, a success has been whenever we have that recognition from community partners and from community members that the work that is happening in like the research component, it's really impacting lives. For example, I'm looking at Tressa through the genetic testing program. We have helped like full families that otherwise would not have had access to genetic testing and would still be like living with that concern, and through many other programs where we get like testimonies from people saying, because of these, now I am able to ABC. So that's the most like rewarding thing. And then as far as challenges, I think we need to do a better job sharing with researchers all the work that happens behind the scenes for these partnerships to happen. And like Brian, who's my colleague at community engagement in the community, understands this. Like sometimes they're writing their budgets and they're thinking about, okay, so we need translation and we need this person to be able to follow up with participants, and we need promotional materials, and can you connect those and all of this. And so we're able to push your research coordinator at 5% FTE. So it's like, well, no, that's not going to work out. And, you know, there is a ton of work happening behind the scenes, building those connections, nurturing those partnerships, being present in the community for us to be able to connect you to that big network, for you to have that trust, that path already paved, and that needs to be compensated for as well. So that is a challenge. And I think on my end, like I need to do a better job, like letting researchers know about all of this work, but then also having that openness on the other end to like recognize that word, like walking the path, feeling the path and acting on it, right? Like putting the resources where they're needed.
Such a great example. Yeah. Well, and if each of you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about the current dynamic, what would that be? And if you could reimagine what these relationships would look like, what would you want these folks to walk away with today? Cue the Jeopardy music.
So as a researcher, what I hope you can walk away with today is that you can actually learn from, be inspired by, and be motivated to have research that makes a difference in the lives of people, be they at a community level, be at a patient disease or medical condition level. What we are here to do is to work with you, to hopefully inspire you and motivate you to work now, sooner, harder, and faster to find answers that really get to what matters to us as communities and patients. And that is what I would hope everybody would walk away with. And as advocates, if I were talking to a group of advocates, I would say, and I want you to know that you have wisdom, insights, and expertise that you can share that nobody else has. Don't lose it. Use it to make a difference for others who are following in your footsteps with your disease or medical condition.
Amazing. Such great points. Others.
I think like it reminded me of like Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And you guys have great power and therefore great responsibility. And we have great hopes on that. And I really hope that you can value so much the expertise that like communities, patients bring to the team, and recognize it in every way, in that co-shared leadership across the path, and that closed loop in the communication and equitable use of resources.
Fantastic.
One, right? One wish with the magic wand.
You can go for two if you'd like.
Okay, if I'm gonna go for one, I want to create like Facebook or something, because then we'd have lots of funding and we could do amazing things here in Kansas City. You guys, please realize, most of us, especially those of us that become research advocates, we understand how hard your life is. You spend about 70% of your time writing research grants, for which I think 12% or maybe 7% something gets funded. And so we understand the amount of time, what we're asking for you to partner with us. What we're asking for is really time. And we know that that's not, you don't have a lot of time sometimes. And so my big ask is, can we continue to move forward so that we have templates, that we have easy to access resources, easy use technology to make those things, and give us all more time until I can figure out how to make the next Facebook and fund all the research in Kansas City. So.
Well, that idea started here. So
Yes,
by this time
exactly.
next year,
Exactly. Next
there
year.
is one. There
Okay,
we
I'll
go.
start working on it. I might need to go to the engineering IT department of KU campus to figure that out, but okay.
Amazing. Well, and time flies when we're having fun. So opening the floor to our guests for a few questions from our amazing panelists who shared such great stories. Yes. We need a microphone. Need a microphone up in the front.
This, I think one of the challenges in rare diseases is, how do you get them motivated to take on something like that? Because it's taking on research in general is overwhelming, right? As you mentioned early in life, and then, oh, I need to focus on this disease that's really rare. How I'm going to do that? So I asked that because I personally was, when I was starting my research career, I did some research in lymphangiomatosis, extremely rare condition affecting women. And we were, we obviously I moved on, but I was just wondering, in retrospect, what could have motivated me to do? And I didn't know if you have any words of wisdom to share with the group here.
Yeah, I actually do. I think spending a little bit of time, one, I don't think there's anything more motivating to have a genuine passion than to come out and meet a young child or an individual with a condition, whatever that condition is. You know, putting that human face behind what you have to get up every day and go spend hours in a lab or wherever you're doing your research. And so taking that time to make connections with the community, whatever area, I think is really important because it will drive your why. I think the other thing too is like the NIH has the Rare Disease Clinical Disease Network. Scott, maybe you know the actual name, something like that. They actually have a 1-year training program for young investigators. It's a virtual training program. And so there are training resources that say, if I want to get in the space, that will set you up with mentors and connections and funding opportunities. And so I think there's a lot of areas and different areas of research to be able to do that. And then I think the other thing too is find yourself a great mentor. You know, there's nothing better than to have somebody that is already well established in the space, or doesn't even have to be a disease specific, just loves rare disease, if that's the space you want to go into, because they will drive your passion, but they'll also be able to network you. The other thing too is don't forget, those of us that do this in many families, especially in rare disease, a lot of times our experts aren't here in Kansas City. And so we have global networks. So we can pretty much get you connected on the phone with some of the global leaders that are always looking for the next generation to mentor, to put on their publications, to participate in those type of things. So don't miss out on that opportunity when you're connecting with your community partners as well.
Great points. Would you like to add?
I don't do much in the rare disease space.
No worries. Would you like to add to any of that?
And I don't mean to take away from Kelly at all, but in cancer and with breast cancer and other cancers, what we're becoming is a community of rare diseases. And so again, to echo exactly what Kelly said, to have touch with the people who are affected, like inflammatory breast cancer, the people who have developed these cancers, so you can see firsthand what it's like to live with that cancer. And I think back over my years of research advocacy, how many times I've gotten young investigators, even more seasoned investigators, together with patients and survivors and co-survivors. And especially if they're lab scientists, they've not had access to patients, and they forget about they forget just about the impact that their work can have and is having. And when they see that firsthand in the lives and faces and people before them, it really does make an impact. So I would say, think about your why. I hope it's people, and reach out and stay in touch with those people, because when you get those tough times, like the 5th time your grant got rejected and the dang reviewers didn't get it and they nitpicked on this and so on, et cetera, reach out to that patient, because we want to be there to help support and encourage you on, and find that nugget that makes it go through the next time around. So we're there to help urge you on as much as we possibly can.
Well, and with those words of wisdom, our session time has unfortunately come to a close, but can we have a big round of applause for these great stories and tips? Frontiers is so lucky. Yes, a standing ovation. I love it. For wonderful partnerships and things going forward. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Julius.
Hello, everyone. For the sake of time, we're going to skip our 5-minute break and move on to our last 2 oral presentations of the afternoon. Dr. Helsel is, oh, there you are. If you please come on up.
Did you have a USB?
It's on
Oh, you
here
already?
already.
Okay.
Sure. Did you want to?
You can blame me if it doesn't work. This is it, right?
Yep.
Okay. Let me just, share screen. I think we're still sharing. No, we're not. And then remember down.
Down
is
is-
to, yeah.
Cool. Thanks. All right. Can you guys hear me okay? Good afternoon. So my name is Brian and I'm with the University of Kansas Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. I am one of the TL1 trainees for the Frontiers program. And I'm here to talk to you today about my research project. It's titled Estimating Walking Intensity in Adults with Down Syndrome Using Portable Accelerometers. So I don't know how much you know about Down syndrome. One interesting fact about Down syndrome is that about 70 to 90% of adults with Down syndrome will develop Alzheimer's disease within their lifetime. We do think that physical activity might have a role in improving cognition and possibly reducing or slowing down dementia onset. But we don't know a lot about physical activity measurement in adults with Down syndrome. We've found in previous research that less than 10% of adults with intellectual disabilities achieve the recommended 150 minutes of physical activity, of moderate to vigorous physical activity each week. And studies report that Down syndrome is even less than that. We also know that accurate measurement of physical activity is imperative for both population-based surveillance and examine the health benefits associated with physical activity. But we don't currently have a validated measure of physical activity in Down syndrome. Portable accelerometers, little devices that can be found in our phone and our watches. They're widely used to assess free living physical activity. They're used in studies like NHANES. And that data from triaxial accelerometers, it's a really rich data source, and they're often expressed in activity counts for a specified time period to represent physical activity intensity. We do calibration studies, and those calibration studies are really to find that point where that accelerometer matches exercise intensity. And so we use this, find a cut point, and then we can estimate free living physical activity with that cut point. And those accelerometers are matched up to energy expenditure while their adult with Down syndrome is exercising. And the energy expenditure is often measured in metabolic equivalents or METs. Those cut points are population specific, and because adults with Down syndrome have differences in biomechanics and physiology, we don't know if those cut points from typically developed adults can translate into cut points for Down syndrome. So my TL1 study is focused on developing activity intensity cut points for moderate to vigorous physical activity, which is defined as greater than or equal to 3 METs, using counts from accelerometers at the non-dominant hip and both wrists. So adults with Down syndrome will come in, exercise with a device on their hip and both wrists. And then the second aim is to compare those Down syndrome specific cut points to those that have been established for typically developed adults. So adults with Down syndrome have been coming in over the past couple of years. We've taken anthropometrics, that includes height, weight, BMI, body composition via DEXA scan. We also take resting energy expenditure. The resting energy expenditure is in order to calculate physical activity intensity. We take that resting energy expenditure and use that in the calculation of METs. So we take wherever they're at exercising with at whatever activity level, and we divide it by their resting energy expenditure, and that's how we get that MET value. Previous studies have shown that adults with Down syndrome have a lower resting energy expenditure, and I'll talk about this and show it in a table in a second, but we've found that in our studies, or at least this one, that REE value is about 35% lower of what we normally assume for a typically developed adult, which is that 3.5 value, which is used to characterize that one MET. This is just an illustration. This is one of our postdocs, Cameron. We had him pose for the picture, but this is the resting energy expenditure canopy, or better known as our astronaut helmet to the adults with Down syndrome. They come in and will lie under that for 30 minutes. And then we have them exercise and do a treadmill walking protocol. So again, wearing those actigraph accelerometers on the non-dominant hip and both wrists during that simultaneous measurement of heart rate and energy expenditure. We do 7-minute stages that starts at 1.5 miles per hour and it's just walking. And we increase it in half mile per hour increments until we reach a vigorous intensity in that final 4 minutes of that 7-minute stage. Vigorous intensity, we define it as greater than 6 METs. We do 5-minute rest periods in between to minimize fatigue, enhance motivation, and provide a clear distinction between phases of movement. And we use timestamp videos to help with all of the matching of the accelerometers and the treadmill measurements. And that's our mask that we have them wear while exercising. So the Darth Vader mask, yeah. This is not, okay, so this is not illustrating the active and steady state. For some reason, the color is not showing up on it. But let me just talk about the stages. So this is just a phase of movement. This is a participant that actually completed 6 stages of the treadmill walking protocol. And the last 4 minutes is the steady state. So you can see each elevated peak or I guess flat level. The first 3 minutes, we exclude that data. And then all the data I'm going to show today is in that last 4 minutes, that steady state period. We look at raw acceleration data sampled at 100 samples per second, and we aggregate that over 5-second epochs for those actigraph accelerometer measurements. In order to determine the optimal MVPA cut point over that 5-second epoch, we look at the sensitivity and specificity closest to the area under the curve. And we also try and minimize the differences between those sensitivity and specificity measurements. And that's how we arrive at that MVPA cut point. So we're comparing the accelerometer measures to our criterion measure, which is measured oxygen consumption or measured MET values through that indirect calorimetry. We look at accuracy, sensitivity, and specificity and area under the curve, common measures that we've heard about before, just to look at the accuracy of those cut points in predicting that oxygen consumption. So we've had 21 participants come in so far. We're hoping to enroll 4 more. We're actually working on scheduling our 22nd now, and we're looking for 3 more to round out at 25. But average age is about 24 years of age so far. And this is just characteristics of our study sample. I won't go into too much detail with this, but one thing I'd like to highlight is that resting energy expenditure value. So again, that's about 35% lower than what we assume for a typically developed adult when we do a lot of these calibration studies. We've had 21 people complete so all of our participants have completed the first 3 stages, and then they start to reach that vigorous intensity. And so we start to see 14, 8, and 2 in the last 3 stages. Our VO2 has ranged from 9 to 25 throughout the stages. And the interesting thing about this table that I'll point out is, so we originally adjusted this protocol from a typically developed adult protocol, which started participants at 3 miles per hour. And so we half that starting speed on the treadmill. And unfortunately, we're still seeing those average values above moderate intensity at that 1.5 mile per hour. So it makes it a little bit more challenging to develop cut point, but a good opportunity for future research, which I'll talk about in a second. So this slide is probably not too meaningful for most of you that aren't physical activity researchers. The cut points are on the second column for the different wear locations and different axes. So accelerometers have 3 axes, X, Y, and Z. That vertical axis is that Y axis, and the vector magnitude is just a combination of all 3. So it's capturing movement in different directions. So accuracy for our cut points range from about 59% to 66%. And that's pretty typical for what we see in the literature for cut points that have been developed for adults without Down syndrome. So really kind of challenging to predict this exercise intensity using accelerometers. The criterion measure, the indirect calorimetry, is that green bar on the right. And so you can see that in terms of that first stage, the adults with Down syndrome are already at about 80% of their time of that last 4 minutes spent in MVPA, and that only goes up through stage 6. That first stage, no matter what cut point location or how we calculate it, really just did a poor job at predicting MVPA at that first stage, that slowest walking stage. So they have a high intensity, but not doing much in terms of movement. And then the accelerometers get a little bit better when we develop these cut points and predict the higher intensities or the higher speeds. And then when we compare this to cut points that have been developed in typically developed adults, so anything with my last name next to it was the Down, and it's in gray, is the Down syndrome specific one we're developing for this study thus far. And then the Troiano, the Fritzen, and the Montoy are cut points that have been developed in typically developed adults. So when you look at the vertical axis, that first or first 2 columns, you can see that the Down syndrome specific cut point for stage 2 gets about 48% of time spent in moderate to vigorous physical activity. The criterion measure at the top is actually 83%. So we're getting about halfway there on that stage 2. The typically developed cut point is only picking up about 11% of that. Stage 3, it gets a little bit better for our cut point and for the Troiano vertical axis cut point, which we actually use in a lot of our research studies at KUMC. And then stage 4, we get even closer to that 98, 99% of MVPA in that last 4 minutes with the Down syndrome specific cut point. So you can see that the Troiano cut point picks up about 75% of that, whereas we're getting almost 90 with this new vertical axis cut point. And then that holds true for the left hip vector magnitude. So when we look at those 3 axes, but one thing that I found that was interesting is that the typically developed adult cut point actually outperformed or got more moderate to vigorous physical activity when we looked at the non-dominant wrist. So that's that Montoy cut point at the very bottom of the screen. That Montoy cut point is a little bit different than some of all the other cut points on the screen, in that it was actually developed doing free living activities and not treadmill-based activities. So it was developed a little bit differently. So some limitations of this study: adults with Down syndrome were already at that moderate intensity in that steady state period. It's not something we expected. And by the time we realized that it was a pattern, it was too late to adjust the protocol. And so we're accounting for that in future studies. Another limitation is the comparison of these accelerometer cut points is difficult due to inconsistent sample frequencies, inconsistent epochs. So they might summarize the intensity over a 1 second interval or a 5 second interval or a 10-second interval. Also, those Down syndrome cut points that we're developing here can really only be applied to treadmill walking and may not be transferable when we're looking at free living physical activity. Conclusions and future directions. So we found that the left hip worn actigraph vector magnitude cut point in terms of our cut points really had the best accuracy for classifying moderate to vigorous physical activity during that treadmill walking. Future directions, we need to confirm these results in a larger sample of adults with Down syndrome. We need to develop and validate free living. So we need to reduce the intensity so that so we can distinguish between light and moderate to vigorous physical activity, and maybe even sedentary and light, so we can get a kind of a true picture of what their exercise looks like throughout the week. And then we need to use, one thing that I'm interested in working at the Alzheimer's Center is to use these cut points, this new improved measurement tool, to understand how physical activity might influence Alzheimer's disease risk in this population. And so that's something that I'm working on with Dr. Jeff Burns and Dr. Lauren Tomey. And as we work to establish a Down syndrome cohort at the KU Alzheimer's Disease Center, we're going to collect some of these physical activity measures. And so we'll be able to monitor that longitudinally over time. And that's all I have. So if you guys have any questions at all, I'd be happy to take them.
Questions? Yes. Oh, need a mic? Here, I can run. I have legs. I have legs. They still work.
So I was just kind of remembering back in the day when I used to do indirect accelerometry and we had them stay all night or 24 hours in a locked room and how hard it was to get people to volunteer to do that. And I was just curious what challenges you've had with recruitment in this population and what you did to overcome that or how you've been able to accrue these people. It's quite impressive.
Yeah, it's a good question. That's still a challenge. You know, we are trying to get the last 4 people into the study. But one kind of community partnership that came out of the TL1 training program is I really got engaged in working with Special Olympics of Kansas and Special Olympics National and Down Syndrome Innovations, which are great community partners for us. They've helped with the recruitment. We've also, from previous studies, we've had the infrastructure kind of built because we had a recently completed R01. Dr. Tomey was the PI that recruited 80 adults with Down syndrome for that study. And so we've had some of that infrastructure in place, but it's definitely been a big community partner. Like last year, I approached Down Syndrome Innovations and Special Olympics to really see if we could come up with like a physical activity alliance. Like we were a lot of us were focused on the same things. And so we did that, and we actually are hosting an event in a couple of weeks where we're going to do a combined physical activity fitness event for families with Down syndrome. And we have almost 300 people signed up already. So yeah, just working with them to pull people in, to let them know about research. And it's especially important because our Down syndrome research here at KU is really increasing a lot with this new Down syndrome cohort and some of the other investigator studies.
And you had said that the resting energy expenditure, that was 30 minutes in the space helmet? Is that?
Yeah, sometimes 40 if they move a lot.
Oh, I was
Yeah.
going to ask you whether the design had to be changed a little bit to accommodate the ability of Down syndrome patients to lay still for that long compared to typically developed people of the same age.
Yeah, yes, a little bit. That's a protocol that's been used in typically developed adults as well. Most adults with Down syndrome are okay. Where we've had a little bit harder time is doing it in kids with Down syndrome. There's a little bit more movement there. But we've only had one measure that I feel like we didn't get a true resting. And there was a little bit too much movement. But we do look at their movement. We have them wear an accelerometer when we have them do the resting energy expenditure. And we look at minute to minute variation and try and keep that as low as possible and find at least like a 5-minute period that they would be in that steady state. But we haven't really had to adjust the protocol too much, except for extending maybe 5 to 10 minutes to try and make sure we capture that steady state period. But ultimately, we don't know until we export the data and process it whether they were truly in that steady state. Yeah.
Do you get feedback from the participants in the study about their experience?
In regards to the resting energy?
Down syndrome adults, do you ask them about how they feel about participating in the study, and would they do it again, or what would need to be changed for them to participate again if they didn't have a positive experience?
So a lot of the adults with Down syndrome that we've had in this study have been repeat offenders, I guess, for a lot of our studies. We've been doing studies in intellectual disability. I just came here in 2020, but we were doing it, I think, back in like 2016, 2015 is when we started. And we've had some participants that had started with us in an adolescent study and have now participated in multiple adult studies. A lot of them, including their parents, are just very eager and excited to participate in research. But those are the only the participants that are in our studies. And so there's a lot more that we haven't reached out to or haven't got connected, where they might not feel the same about research. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done still to establish that connection with those individuals that aren't currently participating in our research studies.
Other questions? Well, if not, thank you very much. So unfortunately, our fourth presenter is still in clinic. She was not able to make it in time. So I'm taking my orders from Dr. Leary that no change, that I should hand the mic over to Dr. Castro to close us out. How's that for bailing on responsibility?
Thanks, Steve. So make sure everybody online. So I just want to thank everybody for a wonderful day. We are going to conclude our research symposium day with a poster session, which will be with some drinks as well out in the lobby. So please take some time to visit the posters and interact with the folks that are come specifically to put up those posters. For those that are online, thank you for participating online and being part of this. Please provide us feedback on this year's symposium. And then lastly, I just want to take a special shout out to Sara for her wonderful, really motivating speech. Thank you, Sara. I certainly took a lot of notes that I need to improve my communication style, and hopefully you all gained a few tips in terms of how to improve our communication with each other on the investigative side, but also with our patients that we ultimately serve. Oh, yes. Let's give them a standing ovation. I also want to recognize our external advisory committee members. I heard great feedback about the breakout sessions. Thank you all for participating today and over the last few days. So thank you to our EAC members, Dr. Cross, Dr. Miller-Hughes, Dr. Khan, and Dr. Pelfrey. Yeah, thank you. Well, on behalf of Steve and I, thank you again for all your participation again today, and especially for our speakers that presented the abstract sessions at their, I thought they were very informative and great sessions, and hope you all will enjoy visiting out with the posters. Thank you again.